Blackridge Correctional Facility appeared long before Elias Mercer reached its gates. The gray walls rose from the earth like a fortress built to bury hope instead of protecting society. Layers of razor wire shimmered beneath the pale morning sun, while armed officers watched every movement from concrete towers. The transport bus slowed to a stop, and silence settled over the prisoners inside. No one spoke. Every man understood that once the doors opened, whatever identity existed beyond those walls would become little more than a faded memory. The steel doors hissed open. Single file, an officer barked. Elias stepped onto the cracked pavement without hesitation. His wrists ached beneath the handcuffs, but his face betrayed nothing. Tall, broad-shouldered, and carrying several faded scars across his knuckles. He projected the image described in the transfer paperwork that had arrived before him. The file labeled him dangerous, violent, and unpredictable. It contained reports of assaults, disciplinary violations, and a sentence that had quietly followed him from one institution to another. None of it explained who he really was. Inside the intake hall, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Every command came without emotion. Fingerprints, photographs, medical screening, property inventory, questions repeated in mechanical voices. Any gang affiliation? No. Enemies inside? No. Anything we should know? Elias lifted his eyes for only a second. No. The officer frowned, scribbled another note, and waved him onward. Hours later, a correctional officer escorted him through endless corridors where metal doors slammed shut behind each checkpoint. Every sound echoed longer than expected, as though the prison itself wanted newcomers to remember they were trapped. Inmates paused during conversations to study the unfamiliar face walking past them. Some whispered, others simply stared. News traveled faster than footsteps inside Blackridge. By evening, Elias reached his assigned cell. It measured barely enough for 2 narrow bunks, a stainless steel toilet, and a tiny window that admitted little more than gray daylight. His cellmate had not yet returned from work detail, leaving the room unusually quiet. Elias placed the few belongings issued by the prison onto the lower bunk. A blanket, 2 uniforms, soap, a toothbrush, everything a person supposedly needed to begin another chapter of confinement. Nothing resembling a life. The heavy door clanged shut. For several long minutes, he simply listened. Distant shouting, keys rattling, someone laughing, someone crying. Every sound carried a story that nobody intended to tell. The following morning introduced the prison's unwritten laws more effectively than any handbook could. Breakfast ended precisely when the guards ordered it to end. Seats belonged to certain inmates whether names were assigned to them or not. Looking too long at another prisoner could invite trouble. Looking away too quickly suggested weakness. Respect was measured differently here. One older inmate leaned close while collecting his tray. "Keep your head down," he muttered. "Nobody survives trying to prove something." Before Elias could answer, the man disappeared into the moving crowd. Work assignments followed immediately after breakfast. Elias joined several inmates inside a maintenance workshop where broken furniture and damaged equipment waited for repair. Conversation remained minimal. Every movement occurred beneath security cameras mounted high above the room, their black lenses turning silently from side to side. Yet the cameras never seemed to capture what truly mattered. The guards watched with practiced boredom, but the inmates watched one another with sharper attention. Every hesitation, every glance, every careless mistake became another piece of information stored for future use. Elias focused on sanding a splintered wooden table, ignoring the occasional whispers drifting across the room. Then he felt it. Someone was watching him. He slowly lifted his head. Across the workshop stood a quiet inmate arranging tools with deliberate care. Unlike the others, he showed no interest in gossip or intimidation. His expression remained calm, almost thoughtful, as though he were studying a puzzle instead of another prisoner. For only a brief moment their eyes met. The stranger looked away without urgency and resumed his work. The encounter lasted only seconds, yet it lingered in Elias's thoughts long after the afternoon whistle echoed through the workshop, leaving him wondering why, among so many hardened faces. That single silent glance felt impossible to forget. The memory of that silent glance refused to leave Elias as the afternoon ended. He told himself it meant nothing. In Blackridge, noticing another inmate too closely could become an invitation to trouble, and trouble had followed him through enough prisons already. Even so, when the maintenance crew assembled the next morning, his eyes searched the workshop before he realized he was looking for the quiet stranger. The man was already there, organizing shelves of worn tools with patient precision. "You missed a screwdriver yesterday," he said without looking up. Elias frowned. "You were paying attention." "I pay attention to everything." The reply carried no challenge, only quiet certainty. For the first time since arriving at Blackridge, someone had spoken to Elias without suspicion or forced bravado. It unsettled him more than open hostility ever could. During the lunch break, the stranger approached carrying his tray. "Mind if I sit?" Elias shrugged. "You'll probably sit anyway." A faint smile crossed the man's face. "My name's Nathan Cole." "Elias, I know." The answer should have sounded threatening. Yet Nathan spoke as though he were discussing the weather. Word traveled quickly inside prisons. "So," Nathan asked after a moment, "is your reputation true?" Elias tore a piece of bread without meeting his eyes. "Depends who's telling the story." Nathan nodded, apparently satisfied with an answer that revealed almost nothing. Over the following days, their conversations remained brief. They discussed books borrowed from the neglected prison library, terrible cafeteria meals, and the endless sameness of prison routines. Neither man asked about convictions or sentences. Those subjects carried too much weight for casual discussion. Nathan possessed an unusual ability to make silence feel comfortable instead of awkward. While other inmates constantly competed for dominance, he seemed untouched by the invisible contests shaping daily life. One afternoon, Elias finally asked, "Why doesn't anyone bother you?" Nathan kept tightening a loose bolt on a damaged workbench. "They used to. What changed?" "They got tired." Elias suspected there was more to the story, but Nathan offered nothing else. As the days blended together, familiarity slowly replaced caution. They began sitting together during meals whenever schedules allowed. In the workshop, they exchanged quiet observations while repairing broken furniture. Sometimes entire conversations consisted of only a few sentences, yet they lingered longer in Elias's mind than hours of meaningless noise surrounding them. Loneliness had strange ways of building bridges. Nathan never treated Elias like the violent man described in official records. Instead, he spoke to him as though another person existed beneath every rumor. That quiet acceptance became unexpectedly valuable. Unfortunately, little escaped notice inside Blackridge. "They're getting close," someone whispered behind them in the cafeteria. "I give it another week before somebody uses that against them." Elias pretended not to hear. Nathan did the same, but whispers multiplied. Conversations stopped whenever they walked past. Laughter followed after they were gone. Even certain correctional officers began watching them with longer, colder stares. The prison's invisible rules shifted almost overnight. A seat left empty beside Elias suddenly remained untouched by everyone except Nathan. Shared work assignments became less frequent after unexplained schedule changes. During recreation periods, groups deliberately occupied nearby benches without saying a word, creating an atmosphere where observation itself became intimidation. One evening, returning from dinner, Elias noticed crude words scratched into the painted corridor wall. "Somebody always watches." He stopped walking. Nathan glanced at the message, then continued forward without slowing. "Ignore it," he said quietly. "You think it's meant for us?" Nathan hesitated before answering. "I think nothing inside these walls happens by accident." The words lingered between them as distant cell doors slammed shut, carrying a warning neither fully understood but both instinctively believed. Nathan's warning lingered in Elias's thoughts long after the corridor had fallen silent. Inside Blackridge, accidents were rare. Every changed assignment, every whisper, every lingering stare carried purpose. Elias had survived by expecting the worst, yet Nathan's calm certainty suggested dangers that even experience could not easily predict. The following week settled into an uneasy routine. The maintenance workshop became the only place where they could exchange more than a few guarded sentences without attracting immediate suspicion. Even there, conversations remained measured, broken apart whenever a correctional officer wandered too close. One rainy afternoon, while repairing cracked wooden lockers, Nathan spoke without lifting his eyes. "Have you ever trusted someone completely?" Elias continued, sanding a rough edge. "That's a dangerous habit. So you've never tried?" "I didn't say that." Nathan waited, but nothing more came. After several moments, he quietly nodded. "I did once." Elias glanced toward him for the first time that day. Nathan's hands slowed. "It was before prison," he said. "There was someone who made me believe life could still become something better." His voice remained steady, though the words seemed carefully chosen. "We planned to leave our old lives behind. We thought distance could erase mistakes." "What happened?" Nathan stared at the damaged locker between them. "He's gone." The answer felt heavier than its simplicity suggested. "Died?" Nathan swallowed before speaking again. "I've spent years asking whether it was an accident, a choice, or something I caused. None of the answers bring him back." Silence settled between them. For the first time, Elias saw cracks beneath Nathan's calm exterior. The quiet confidence that set him apart from other inmates suddenly resembled carefully controlled grief. "I'm sorry," Elias said. Nathan offered a faint smile. "Most people aren't." The afternoon whistle ended the conversation before either man could continue. Yet something had changed. Nathan had entrusted Elias with a piece of himself, however incomplete, while Elias remained surrounded by walls no prison had built. Days passed before Nathan tried again. "What about you?" he asked during recreation. "My past stays there. Everyone says that." "They're right." Nathan studied him. "Sometimes refusing to talk says more than talking." Elias looked toward the chain-link fence surrounding the exercise yard. "The less people know, the safer they are." Nathan considered the answer but sensed another truth hiding beneath it. Instead of pressing further, he simply walked beside him. That decision earned more trust than any question could have. Their friendship gradually became something neither man named aloud. Small gestures replaced spoken feelings. Nathan would quietly save the better portion of bread whenever meals were particularly poor. Elias instinctively positioned himself between Nathan and confrontational inmates in crowded hallways. Brief smiles appeared more often than either expected. Neither acknowledged the growing affection. Inside Blackridge, even friendship attracted attention. Anything deeper invited danger. They learned to hide naturally. Conversations became shorter whenever guards approached. During inspections, they stood apart. At meals, they sometimes chose different tables before quietly meeting later in the workshop under the excuse of unfinished repairs. The secrecy itself deepened their bond. One evening, while organizing supplies after everyone else had left, Nathan reached for a toolbox at the same moment Elias did. Their hands touched. Neither moved. For only a heartbeat, the noise of the prison disappeared. Nathan looked into Elias's eyes. "We should be careful." "I know. But..." Elias hesitated. "I don't want to pretend I don't care." Nathan's guarded expression softened. "You don't have to pretend when we're alone." The sound of approaching footsteps instantly pulled them apart. A correctional officer entered, glanced around the workshop, and frowned. "You two finished?" "Yes, sir," Nathan answered calmly. The officer lingered another moment before walking away. Neither man spoke until the door closed again. Unfortunately, they were not as unseen as they believed. Across the hallway, another inmate had paused outside the storage room long enough to witness their closeness. Victor Hale was older than most prisoners, with watchful eyes and a patient smile that rarely reached them. Unlike men who relied on fists, Victor preferred information. Secrets were currency inside Blackridge, and collecting them had become his profession. As Elias and Nathan exited separately, Victor leaned against the corridor wall, pretending to tie his boot. He watched each of them disappear in opposite directions. Then he smiled to himself. Some secrets were worth far more than others, and he had just discovered one that promised to become extremely valuable. Victor's quiet smile went unnoticed, but the secret he carried had already begun gathering weight. Inside Blackridge, information rarely stayed buried for long. It changed hands, grew sharper with every retelling, and eventually became a weapon. Neither Elias nor Nathan realized that their carefully guarded moments had already entered someone else's plans. 3 mornings later, an unexpected announcement interrupted breakfast. Medical evaluations. Selected inmates will report immediately. Groans spread through the dining hall. Routine health checks were uncommon, and nobody welcomed extra attention from the prison's medical staff. Nathan glanced toward Elias before following a correctional officer down the corridor. "It'll probably be quick," he said quietly. Elias nodded. "I'll see you afterward." Hours passed before Nathan returned. He looked different. His shoulders, usually relaxed, had stiffened. His face had lost its quiet warmth, replaced by a blank expression that frightened Elias more than panic would have. Nathan avoided everyone's eyes and walked straight toward his cell without speaking. That evening, Elias found him sitting alone on the lower bunk, staring at the concrete floor. "What happened?" Nathan remained silent. "Elias." His voice barely rose above a whisper. "They ran more tests." Elias sat across from him, and Nathan's hands trembled. "The doctor said I tested positive for HIV." The words seemed to drain the air from the tiny cell. For several long seconds, neither man moved. Nathan finally covered his face. "I don't understand." Elias searched for something reassuring to say, but every sentence felt painfully inadequate. "Are they certain?" They repeated the test. Nathan laughed once, though no amusement reached his voice. "They apologized before telling me." Silence settled between them again. Nathan's breathing became uneven. "I keep trying to remember. Remember what? When it happened." His eyes remained fixed on the floor. "I've replayed every year in my head since they told me. Every mistake. Every person I trusted." Elias leaned forward. "You don't know." "Exactly." Nathan's voice cracked. "Not knowing is worse." Over the following days, Nathan withdrew into himself. Meals went untouched. Conversations disappeared. Even the maintenance workshop, once the only place where he seemed at peace, became another room he endured rather than occupied. He spent hours questioning memories that refused to provide certainty. Was the infection recent? Had he unknowingly carried it for years? Had someone lied? Every unanswered question deepened his isolation. One afternoon, he finally spoke. "You should stay away from me." Elias looked up from the workbench. "I'm serious." "No." Nathan's frustration surfaced. "You don't know what this means. I know it changes things. It changes everything." Elias stepped closer, lowering his voice. "It doesn't erase who you are." Nathan searched his face, hoping to find hesitation. Instead, he found determination. "We'll figure this out." Nathan wanted to believe him. Part of him did. Another part wondered whether compassion could survive fear. That hidden uncertainty quietly settled between them. Elias never voiced the questions forming in his own mind. He trusted Nathan, yet he could not ignore the sudden flood of unknowns surrounding the diagnosis. He hated himself for wondering about timelines, past relationships, and possibilities neither of them could answer. The doubts remained invisible. So did Nathan's fear that Elias might eventually walk away? Meanwhile, Victor Hale watched every change with careful interest. He noticed Nathan eating alone. He noticed Elias lingering outside the medical unit. Most importantly, he noticed the confidential envelope tucked beneath a nurse's clipboard before it disappeared into an office. Information always left traces. Within days, whispers drifted through Blackridge's corridors. "They say someone's infected. Heard it was Nathan. Keep your distance." Nobody admitted knowing the source. By the week's end, inmates who had once ignored Nathan deliberately avoided him. Conversations stopped when he approached. Trays were moved at meals. Mocking laughter echoed behind his back, while even sympathetic faces carried uncertainty. Nathan looked at Elias across the crowded cafeteria, realizing the diagnosis had escaped the medical office. Someone had told the prison. Someone wanted everyone to know. Someone wanted everyone to know. That realization settled over Nathan more heavily than the diagnosis itself. Medical information was supposed to remain confidential, yet within days nearly every inmate in Blackridge seemed aware of his condition. Some reacted with ignorance, others with cruelty, and a few with calculated silence. The prison had discovered a new weakness, and weakness never remained untested for long. Breakfast became an exercise in humiliation. As Nathan approached an empty seat, another inmate quietly picked up his tray and moved elsewhere. Laughter followed from a nearby table. "Careful," someone muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You never know." No one challenged the remark. Nathan lowered his eyes and finished the meal in silence. The maintenance workshop offered little relief. Conversations stopped whenever he entered. Shared tools were suddenly wiped down after he touched them. Even inmates who understood the facts avoided speaking against the growing hostility, unwilling to become targets themselves. Elias watched everything. His fists tightened each time whispered insults reached his ears. One afternoon he confronted a prisoner who deliberately shoved Nathan while passing through a narrow corridor. "Got something to say?" Elias demanded. The man smirked. "Everybody's saying it already." Before the argument could become violent, correctional officers stepped between them. "Enough." Elias obeyed, but only because refusing meant solitary confinement. His anger remained, burning beneath a carefully controlled expression. Nathan noticed. "Don't," he said later. "They're trying to provoke you. They're already succeeding. They want you to lose control." Elias looked toward the security cameras mounted above the hallway. "I think they want something else." Nathan frowned. "What?" "I think somebody planned this." The suspicion refused to leave him. Medical files did not simply appear in prison gossip. Someone had deliberately carried the information beyond the infirmary walls. Whether it had come from a staff member or another inmate hardly mattered anymore. Someone had chosen Nathan. While Elias searched for answers, another figure quietly entered Nathan's daily routine. Victor Hale approached during recreation, carrying himself with the relaxed confidence of someone who understood the prison's hidden currents. "Tough week," he observed. Nathan offered only a brief nod. "People can be cruel. I've noticed." Victor sat beside him without invitation. "You'll need friends now." Nathan remained cautious. "I already have one." Victor smiled politely. "Elias means well." The pause that followed felt deliberate. But loyalty gets expensive inside Blackridge. Nathan said nothing. "I've survived here a long time," Victor continued. "I know which guards listen, which inmates can be trusted, and which ones should never hear your business." "And why are you telling me this?" "Because someone should." Nathan could not decide whether the conversation felt comforting or unsettling. Over the following days, Victor appeared with surprising frequency. He warned Nathan about aggressive inmates, suggested safer routes through crowded corridors, and quietly discouraged confrontations. His advice often proved accurate, making suspicion difficult to justify. Yet every helpful gesture carried an invisible thread. Victor always seemed eager to learn more. How long had Nathan known Elias? Did they trust each other completely? Had Elias changed since the diagnosis? Nathan answered carefully, revealing little. Even so, Victor listened with remarkable patience. Meanwhile, Elias grew increasingly restless. He questioned every coincidence, every altered work schedule, every guard lingering outside the medical unit, every whispered conversation ending as he approached. Sleep became difficult. The smallest noises outside his cell pulled him awake. He replayed recent events repeatedly, searching for the moment everything had begun unraveling. The prison itself seemed to change. Concrete walls felt narrower. Security cameras resembled watchful eyes rather than protective devices. Ordinary conversations sounded like coded messages. Fear spread more efficiently than violence ever could. Nathan sensed the transformation as well. "We're prisoners," he whispered one evening. Elias slowly shook his head. "No." He stared into the dimly lit corridor beyond the cell bars. "We've become pieces in someone else's game, and whoever started it hasn't finished playing yet." "We've become pieces in someone else's game, and whoever started it hasn't finished playing yet." Nathan wished Elias was wrong. Unfortunately, each passing day made those words feel less like fear and more like reality. The prison had become strangely unpredictable. Conversations ended when either of them approached. Guards appeared in unusual places. Even routine schedules shifted without explanation, creating the constant impression that invisible hands were moving everyone into carefully chosen positions. Victor Hale remained calm through it all. He never appeared rushed. He never raised his voice. Instead, he quietly inserted himself wherever uncertainty already existed. One afternoon, while helping Nathan repair damaged shelving in the workshop, Victor spoke almost casually. "You and Elias seem quieter lately." Nathan shrugged. "Things have been difficult." "I imagine they have." Victor tightened a loose screw before continuing. "I probably shouldn't say anything." Nathan looked toward him. "Then don't." Victor smiled faintly. "You're right." Several minutes passed before he spoke again. "I only wondered whether Elias ever told you everything." Nathan frowned. "What does that mean?" Victor hesitated just long enough to appear reluctant. "I've heard stories from another facility." Nathan's heartbeat quickened. "Stories about what?" "Relationships." Victor immediately shook his head. "They're probably just rumors." Nathan's expression changed. "If they're only rumors, why mention them?" "Forget I said anything." Victor returned to his work, leaving the unanswered question hanging heavily in the air. Nathan spent the rest of the afternoon distracted. He reminded himself that prisons manufactured lies every day, yet doubt had already found a place to grow. Across the compound, Victor carefully planted another seed. Elias had just finished unloading maintenance supplies when Victor approached carrying a clipboard. "You look exhausted." "I've been busy." Victor nodded sympathetically. "Nathan too." Elias looked up. "What about him?" Victor lowered his voice. "I don't think he's handling everything very well." "I know. He asks a lot of questions." Elias remained silent, mostly about trust. Victor pretended to study the clipboard. "I told him nobody should judge another person's past." Elias stared at him. "My past?" Victor shrugged. "I assumed he'd already spoken to you." "What exactly did he ask?" Victor appeared uncomfortable. "Nothing important." Elias stepped closer. "Victor, he wondered whether you'd been completely honest." The words struck harder than Elias expected. "Honest about what?" "I didn't ask." Victor raised both hands slightly. "I figured it wasn't my place." When Victor walked away moments later, Elias stood frozen. Nathan had promised not to judge him for refusing to discuss his past. Why was he asking other people instead? That evening, the tension became impossible to ignore. Nathan found Elias unusually distant during dinner. "Everything okay?" "I'm fine." "You don't sound fine." Elias forced a thin smile. "Just tired." Nathan recognized the lie but chose not to challenge it. The following day, uncertainty deepened. Nathan remembered Victor's unfinished sentence about relationships. Elias remembered Victor's warning about questions. Neither mentioned either conversation. Instead, both quietly observed the other, searching for confirmation of fears they could no longer dismiss. Small misunderstandings suddenly carried enormous weight. When Elias arrived late to the workshop because of an unexpected inspection, Nathan wondered where he had really been. When Nathan ended a conversation moments before Elias approached, Elias assumed he had been discussing him. Neither explanation was true. Neither man knew how carefully those moments had been arranged. Finally, the pressure erupted. "What aren't you telling me?" Nathan asked one evening inside the nearly empty workshop. Elias looked up sharply. "I could ask you the same thing." Nathan folded his arms. "Then ask. Have you been talking about me?" Nathan blinked. "What?" "My past." "I asked one question. So you admit it." Nathan's voice hardened. "Because nobody knows anything about you. And that's suddenly a problem?" "No." Nathan hesitated. "It becomes one when someone hints you've hidden things." Elias laughed bitterly. "Someone. So there is something. You don't even trust me enough to ask directly." "I am asking now." Their voices rose. Weeks of buried anxiety spilled into the open. Neither noticed Victor walking quietly past the workshop entrance, slowing just enough to hear every word before disappearing down the corridor with a satisfied smile. Inside, the argument continued until silence finally replaced anger. Nathan walked away first. Elias remained behind, staring at the unfinished workbench between them. Both believed the other had changed. Neither realized they had been listening to the same liar all along. Neither realized they had been listening to the same liar all along. The argument echoed in Elias's mind long after Nathan disappeared down the corridor. Every accusation had felt strangely rehearsed, as though invisible hands had been arranging their conflict for weeks. He wanted to chase after Nathan, explain everything, and demand the truth in return. Pride, however, proved stronger than reason, and the opportunity slipped away. For the next 2 days, they barely spoke. Meals passed in uncomfortable silence. Work assignments were completed without the quiet conversations that had once made prison life bearable. Other inmates noticed the distance between them almost immediately. Whispers spread once again, though this time they carried satisfaction instead of curiosity. Victor observed the growing divide with patient confidence. Nothing unfolded too quickly. Pressure worked best when victims believed they had created it themselves. On Thursday evening, dark clouds gathered above Blackridge. Rain hammered the concrete rooftops, and distant thunder rattled the reinforced windows. The worsening weather caused brief power fluctuations throughout the prison, drawing irritated complaints from correctional officers already struggling to finish the evening count. Lights flickered twice before stabilizing. No one thought much of it. Shortly before the maintenance crew finished cleaning the workshop, another surge swept through the building. The overhead lights blinked again. Then several surveillance monitors inside the security office abruptly went black. What happened? One officer called. A technician hurried toward the control panel. Camera failure, he replied. I'm checking the system. Rows of monitors continued displaying live footage from most corridors, but several cameras covering the maintenance wing remained dark. The outage appeared limited, temporary, routine. Supervisors ordered staff to continue normal operations while technicians investigated the malfunction. Later reports would describe it as a technical failure. Inside the workshop, only a handful of inmates remained, completing end-of-day assignments before returning to their housing units. Elias tightened the final bolts on a repaired storage cabinet without looking toward Nathan, who silently sorted tools at the opposite workbench. The distance between them felt greater than the room itself. Nathan finally broke the silence. We can't keep doing this. Elias stopped working. I know. I don't even remember why we're angry anymore. Elias exhaled slowly. Because someone wanted us to be. Nathan looked up. You still believe that? I never stopped. Before Nathan could answer, heavy footsteps echoed outside the workshop. The door swung open. Victor entered alone. His expression remained calm, though something unsettling lingered beneath the smile. Interesting place for a private conversation, he remarked. Neither man answered. Victor stepped farther inside. I've spent days watching both of you destroy what little trust you had. This doesn't concern you, Elias replied. Victor chuckled softly. Concerns me more than you realize. Nathan frowned. What are you talking about? Instead of answering directly, Victor reached into his pocket and unfolded several handwritten pages. I've collected quite a few stories. He waved the papers carelessly. Different versions for different people. Elias stared at him. You started this. Victor smiled. I encouraged it. Nathan's face paled. The rumors were surprisingly easy. Anger erupted before either man fully understood what was happening. Elias lunged forward. Victor shoved a work table aside. Nathan instinctively stepped between them, shouting for both to stop. Metal tools crashed onto the concrete floor. The workshop erupted into confusion. A heavy shelving unit tipped during the struggle, sending equipment scattering across the room. One inmate nearby yelled for officers, but the pounding rain and the temporary camera outage delayed any immediate response. Someone stumbled. Someone cried out. Then everything became terrifyingly still. Footsteps thundered through the corridor moments later as correctional officers finally forced open the workshop door. The participants were separated almost immediately. Orders echoed across the room. Everyone was searched. Everyone was questioned. Conflicting accounts emerged before the night even ended. Some claimed Elias attacked first. Others insisted Victor provoked the confrontation. Nathan, visibly shaken, spoke very little. Because no functioning surveillance footage existed from the critical minutes, investigators relied entirely upon inconsistent witness statements. The workshop was sealed. All 3 inmates were escorted to separate holding areas while administrators began documenting the incident. Throughout the night, officers searched for missing evidence, reconstructed timelines, and argued over contradictory reports. Exhaustion gradually replaced urgency, and by dawn many believed the disturbance had ended without lasting consequences. They were wrong. At first light, a correctional officer unlocked a storage room connected to the maintenance workshop. A body lay motionless on the floor. Within minutes, alarms echoed through Blackridge. Medical personnel confirmed the inmate was dead. The prison entered immediate lockdown. Detectives arrived before noon. When they reviewed Elias Mercer's disciplinary history, learned about his recent conflict, and discovered his close relationship with the victim, suspicion settled on him almost instantly, leaving him to face questions that would change everything. The suspicion settled on Elias almost instantly, but certainty proved far more difficult to establish. Within hours of the discovery, Blackridge Correctional Facility transformed from a prison into an active crime scene. Yellow evidence markers covered the maintenance workshop. Corridors were sealed. Officers whispered behind closed doors while detectives photographed every corner of the building, hoping the missing surveillance footage would not leave the investigation blind. Elias sat alone inside a narrow interview room. A digital recorder clicked on. Detective Laura Bennett placed a thin folder on the table. You and the victim argued the night before the body was found. Elias kept his eyes on the tabletop. We argued. Witnesses say you became violent. Witnesses say a lot of things. Her partner, Detective Marcus Reed, leaned forward. Then tell us your version. Elias took a slow breath. We weren't fighting because of each other. What do you mean? Someone wanted us fighting. The detectives exchanged a brief glance. Who? I don't know. It sounded weak even to him. The interviews continued throughout the day. Nathan, pale and visibly exhausted, struggled to answer even simple questions. He admitted arguing with Elias but insisted neither of them wanted real violence. We were manipulated, he said quietly. By whom? Detective Bennett asked. Nathan hesitated. I think. Victor Hale. Across the prison, Victor remained remarkably composed during questioning. I saw tension building for weeks, he explained. I tried calming them down. You entered the workshop that evening. Only because I heard raised voices. So you were helping? I was trying. His answers arrived smoothly, without hesitation. Almost too smoothly. Correctional officers added another layer of confusion. One guard insisted Victor had warned staff about growing hostility between Elias and Nathan days before the confrontation. Another claimed no such warning had ever been reported. A maintenance supervisor remembered hearing crashing tools before officers responded. Another employee insisted the hallway had been completely quiet. Every statement contradicted the last. Detective Reed pinned photographs, timelines, and interview summaries across a temporary investigation board inside an unused conference room. The more information they collected, the less sense the timeline made. Instead of narrowing possibilities, each interview created new questions. As investigators revisited earlier incidents, forgotten details resurfaced. A nurse reluctantly admitted someone had repeatedly asked unusual questions about confidential medical procedures shortly before Nathan's diagnosis became public. She could not identify the individual. A correctional clerk acknowledged that inmate work assignments had been altered several times without documented authorization. Someone with administrative access had quietly moved prisoners into specific locations. The records contained no explanation. Flashbacks assembled themselves through fragmented memories. Nathan remembered Victor casually mentioning rumors about Elias's past. Elias recalled Victor suggesting Nathan no longer trusted him. Another inmate confessed that Victor frequently traded favors in exchange for information. A kitchen worker admitted owing Victor gambling debts. A janitor described overhearing officers accepting small bribes to ignore unauthorized movement between housing units. Each recollection revealed another hidden thread. The prison's invisible hierarchy extended beyond inmates alone. Blackridge had become a place where information carried greater value than money. Secrets purchased protection. Rumors settled old scores. Silence became another form of currency. Detective Bennett circled Victor's name repeatedly inside her notebook. He appears everywhere. Reed nodded. But appearing everywhere isn't murder. No. She looked toward the growing evidence board. But manipulating everyone might explain why nobody agrees. Meanwhile, Nathan replayed recent weeks inside his own mind. Victor's carefully timed conversations. The unfinished sentences. The convenient warnings. Every doubt that had driven him away from Elias suddenly seemed planted rather than discovered. Across another holding room, Elias reached the same conclusion. Neither man had truly stopped trusting the other. Someone had patiently taught them how. Late that evening, Detective Bennett requested financial records for several prison employees after noticing unexplained inconsistencies in overtime reports and maintenance requests connected to the camera outage. "What are you thinking?" Reed asked. She studied the timeline one more time. If someone benefited from divided loyalties, leaked medical information, altered schedules, and disabled cameras, we're asking the wrong first question. What should we be asking? She capped her pen. Not who committed the murder. Her eyes settled on Victor's photograph before moving toward the names of several staff members. We need to find out who gained the most from everything that happened before anyone died. The investigation shifted direction after detectives examined the medical records connected to Nathan's diagnosis. What initially appeared to be a private medical matter became another piece of a much larger pattern. Detective Bennett requested every document related to Nathan's screening, treatment, and confidentiality procedures. The records revealed several inconsistencies that immediately raised concerns. The date of the original test did not match the date entered into the system. A follow-up review had been requested earlier than expected, yet no official explanation existed for the additional examination. Most importantly, notes showed that information from the medical department had been accessed by someone without a clear reason. Someone had been searching. Someone had been looking for something they could use. When Nathan was informed about the findings, he sat silently for several minutes. So it was never just a rumor, he said. Bennett shook her head. No. Someone turned your diagnosis into a weapon. Nathan lowered his eyes. For weeks, he had carried shame that did not belong to him. He had believed the whispers, the distance, and the judgment were consequences of his own circumstances. Now he understood that fear had been deliberately created around him. The discovery also forced Elias to examine every moment leading up to the murder. He sat with investigators and reconstructed the timeline piece by piece. The first rumors, the sudden hostility, Victor's carefully chosen conversations, the arguments that seemed to appear from nowhere. The more Elias explained, the clearer the pattern became. Victor had rarely lied directly. Instead, he offered fragments of information, allowed people to create their own conclusions, and then watched those conclusions destroy trust. He never pushed us, Elias said quietly. Detective Reed looked up. No, he just pointed us toward the cliff and waited. The investigation uncovered additional evidence supporting Elias's theory. Messages between inmates revealed that Victor had been collecting personal information for months. Several prisoners admitted he used secrets to gain influence. Others described him as someone who created problems only to later present himself as the solution. Nathan remembered every conversation differently now. The warnings that once seemed protective felt calculated. The sympathy that once seemed genuine felt rehearsed. Even Victor's offer of friendship carried a hidden purpose. Yet detectives still needed proof connecting him directly to the murder. Manipulation explained the chaos. It did not prove homicide. Meanwhile, the prison atmosphere changed again. Inmates who had spread rumors about Nathan became quieter. Some avoided his eyes. uncomfortable with the realization that they had participated in someone else's plan. Elias found Nathan after questioning ended. For several seconds, neither spoke. "I should have trusted you," Nathan finally said. Elias looked away. "I should have fought harder to understand." The apology did not erase what happened, but it opened a door that anger had closed. They both knew something larger had been happening around them. Someone had studied their weaknesses. Someone had exploited their fears. And someone had benefited when their bond collapsed. Late that night, detectives discovered another detail hidden inside the investigation files. A witness statement previously dismissed contained a small but important observation. Victor had entered the workshop earlier than he claimed. The timing placed him near the scene before the confrontation began. Detective Bennett read the statement twice before placing it beside the evidence board. The case was no longer centered on a broken relationship. It was centered on the person who had carefully broken it. Victor had entered the workshop earlier than he claimed, and that single detail changed the direction of the entire investigation. Detectives no longer viewed him as a witness caught in the middle of chaos. They saw him as someone who had carefully arranged every moment leading to the tragedy. Victor was brought into questioning again the following morning. This time, the investigators placed photographs, records, and statements across the table in front of him. The confidence he carried for weeks began to disappear. "You knew about the camera outage," Detective Bennett said. "You knew where everyone would be." Victor remained silent. "You manipulated Nathan and Elias until they stopped trusting each other. Then you created the perfect situation." Victor leaned back slowly. For the first time, his usual calm expression cracked. "I didn't create their weaknesses," he said. "I only found them." The confession did not arrive as an emotional outburst. Instead, Victor spoke with the unsettling honesty of someone who had justified his actions for years. He explained that control had always mattered more to him than friendship or loyalty. Growing up, he had learned that information gave people power. Knowing someone's fears, mistakes, and regrets meant knowing how to influence them. Inside prison, that belief became stronger. Victor discovered that fear was more effective than violence. A rumor could destroy trust. A secret could ruin a reputation. A carefully chosen lie could turn two people against each other without ever appearing responsible. Nathan and Elias had simply become his latest experiment. "I watched them," Victor admitted. "They depended on each other. That made them vulnerable." Detective Reed looked disgusted. "So you decided to break them?" Victor looked down. "I wanted to prove that nobody stays loyal when enough pressure is applied." The detectives continued questioning him, uncovering years of resentment buried beneath his controlled personality. Victor described feeling powerless throughout his life and becoming obsessed with controlling situations before they could control him. Every manipulation had been his attempt to avoid feeling weak again. But the damage he caused was real. Nathan's medical information had been exposed. Elias had been pushed toward anger and suspicion. An innocent relationship had been turned into a battlefield. And during the final confrontation, one person had lost their life. Victor's confession revealed that he never intended the night to end with murder. He claimed he only wanted the argument to destroy the trust between Nathan and Elias completely. However, his actions had created circumstances where violence became unavoidable. The detectives understood the truth clearly. Physical wounds were visible. Psychological damage was harder to measure. Yet both could destroy lives. When Victor was removed from the interview room, Blackridge felt different. The mystery surrounding the murder had finally been answered, but no one inside the prison felt victorious. Nathan struggled with guilt over every moment he doubted Elias. Elias carried the memory of every accusation he had spoken in anger. The truth had finally reached them, but it arrived carrying consequences that could never be reversed. Victor Hale had been exposed. Justice had entered Blackridge. But it had arrived after the loss of someone who would never walk through those prison gates again. After Victor's confession and the official closing of the case, Blackridge returned to its familiar routines, but the people inside its walls were never the same again. The alarm still sounded, the doors still locked, and the guards still walked the same concrete corridors. yet everyone carried memories that could not be erased. Nathan and Elias discovered that knowing the truth did not bring the relief they expected. The investigation had exposed Victor's manipulation and proved their suspicions were carefully created, but it could not remove the pain caused by weeks of fear, isolation, and mistrust. Both men struggled with guilt over the moments when they allowed doubt to replace understanding. Nathan often returned to the memories of the days when he believed the world had turned against him. The whispers, the rejection, and the shame attached to his diagnosis remained painful reminders of how quickly people judged what they did not understand. He knew the truth about his condition now, but the damage caused by the stigma was not something that disappeared with an explanation. Elias faced different battles. He carried regret for every argument, every accusation, and every opportunity to choose patience instead of anger. For years, he believed strength meant hiding emotions and refusing vulnerability. Nathan's presence had challenged that belief, and losing their sense of safety had shown him the cost of emotional walls. The prison administration announced reforms after the investigation revealed failures within Blackridge. Medical privacy procedures were changed, security reviews were expanded, and staff members were held accountable for negligence. Yet many inside the prison understood that rules could only prevent some failures. They could not force people to show compassion. The murder case was officially closed, but the consequences continued beyond paperwork and court decisions. The victim's absence remained a constant reminder that manipulation could create destruction without appearing violent at first. Victor had used secrets, fear, and emotional pressure as weapons, proving that psychological abuse could be as damaging as physical harm. Months passed, and Nathan and Elias slowly rebuilt the trust they had nearly lost. Their conversations became honest again, not because the past was forgotten, but because they finally understood the importance of facing painful truths together. They learned that forgiveness did not erase mistakes, but it allowed people to continue living after them. Blackridge remained a place defined by confinement, but the story of what happened there became a warning about loneliness and vulnerability. The institution had failed people who needed protection, allowing rumors and manipulation to grow stronger than empathy. The investigation uncovered the murderer, but it also revealed deeper problems hidden beneath the surface. Years later, the events were still remembered by those who survived them. They remembered the tragedy, the betrayal, and the fear, but they also remembered the lessons. Truth could expose wrongdoing, yet it could not return lost time or undo suffering. Justice could hold someone accountable, yet it could not heal every wound. In the end, Blackridge taught a painful lesson. Finding the truth mattered, but healing required more than answers. It required compassion, courage, and the willingness to see humanity even in places where people had forgotten it. The scars remained, but the survivors carried forward a deeper understanding that every person held unseen battles and every choice could change a life. Their story endured as a reminder that truth without empathy was incomplete, and healing demanded patience beyond moments of revelation.